The demise of Kodak digital photography really is an interesting story. It's still used as case studies in business textbooks to this day. But let's forget about all that for a moment. For this video, let's jump back in time to the prime of digital Kodak photography when they released this, the Kodak Pro DCS 14N. This is Kodak's first and last full-frame DSLR, and it's actually the third ever full-frame DSLR ever to be released, right behind Contax and Canon. Technically, there were two other models following this camera, but I don't really count them. They were just minor upgrades to this one. Basically, this was the last DSLR Kodak made. The DCS in the name stands for Digital Camera Science. That's an internal Kodak name that they used. The 14 stands for how many megapixels. This is 14 megapixels. We'll talk about that later. That's important. And the Pro just stands for professional. Check out this body design first. Before this camera, Kodak DSLRs were really just modded versions of other DSLRs on the market with Kodak internal guts on the inside. And this camera is no different. The top half of this camera actually comes from a Nikon F80 film body. And the bottom half is all Kodak. And it's bulbous. I actually realized that I have another DSLR that uses this same Nikon F80 top plate. That is also not Nikon. I'll let you take a guess at what the camera that is. It's not just you. The bottom of this Kodak is quite large. The front and the back stick out very far, and it's the most curvy DSLR I have ever seen. And the funny bit about all that is it's not even that comfortable to hold. It does offer a vertical holding position here with a shutter up at the top for vertical shooting, and it's the most compact height-wise DSLR I've seen with a built-in vertical grip, so I guess it has that going for it. Over here on the back, you can see where the cards go under this flap. The camera accepts both CF and SD cards, which is a handy feature. And the menu system on this camera is crazy. Get a load of this. As you go through the menu options, a separate display here at the bottom will read out a detailed explanation of what this setting does. This is so cool. And maybe as you learn the camera more, you don't need this as much, but for someone who was brand new to the camera and was still trying to, and still to this day, still trying to figure out what certain settings do, this is really handy. There's a microphone here on the back of the camera, and this is for leaving yourself little voice memos about maybe where a shot was taken and what was going on at the time. This is a voice memo using the Kodak, and I'm recording it right on the image itself, so I could leave a little note about where this image was taken, which was my desk. Early Kodak digital cameras in the 90s were really focused on photojournalism, and this seems like a feature that would be handy for that. The camera does use a proprietary battery, and that really is a bummer nowadays. No one makes these batteries anymore, so you're left using old ones and getting what short lifespan out of them that you can. I get maybe 50 shots out of each charge if I'm lucky. Or you can do what one of my friends and members of my Snappiness Discord group did and buy an external battery pack that mounts to the bottom of the camera. And while this works, it looks extremely uncomfortable and it was painful to set up, but it works. Actually using this camera is a bit of a mixed bag. It's not nearly as positive as it was with the DCS 760 that I just made a video about. And the primary reason for that is it's really just not very comfortable to hold, to shoot with. The controls are okay. Most of them are intuitive. The one thing that I don't like about the controls is that the ISO, you have to switch out of whatever mode you're shooting in, change the ISO, and then go back. Maybe there's a shortcut to do that. I have not figured it out. So that's a little gimmicky. And then finally, this does not matter at all, but it kind of matters to me. The shutter sound is just kind of muted and soft. That's probably technically better. There's probably less shutter slap, but I like my old DSLRs with a bit of a heavy clunk to their shutter sound. The sponsor of today's video is Bai, the website for buying camera gear like this directly from Japan. It works by giving you access to Japanese only listings. The sellers then ship domestically in Japan to Bai's warehouse, who inspects the packages and then sends them off to you. I've been using Bai for over a year now on everything from obscure Japanese only cameras to getting great deals on cameras and lenses that are just harder to find here in the United States. A couple of my buying tips would be to pay close attention to the yen conversion rate for an even better deal, read through the descriptions carefully and use translation, and just remember that you're paying for shipping twice. I have a whole video explaining the process that I'll link below, and also a link down there where you can save some money on your first purchase. So check that out. This is the Nikon F mount version. There was a later version of the camera that came with a Canon EF mount and actually used the body from a Sigma. So it was a Sigma body, a Canon mount, and Kodak guts, which is truly a Frankenstein camera. But this is the Nikon F mount version, and that's been super fun to dip my toes into the Nikon F mount world. And there's some fantastic lenses out there for the cheap, like this Nikon D35 to 105 millimeter that was gifted to me and shoots way better, performs way better than it ought to. The sensor in this camera is full frame, and it's just special as being one of the very first digital full frame sensors that we ever got on the market. It's actually not made by Kodak. It's made by a company called Fill Factory exclusively for Kodak, not Kodak made like my DCS 760 was, or some of the later Kodak sensors made sensors that were made for other cameras. The other interesting difference from Kodak made sensors is that this sensor is CMOS, not CCD, which at the time was still kind of unusual. Canon went the same route with CMOS and other companies followed suit later. But technical specs aside, what really matters is that it can produce beautiful results. These are really pleasing files to work with in post, and you can easily get some great stuff straight from the camera. It has a surprising amount of dynamic range too, especially in highlight protection, which for the age of the camera is really remarkable. And then I've never seen a digital camera do this before, but highlights reflecting off of surfaces have a very strong blooming and a red cast to them. I hesitate to use the word halation because I know that's a technical term for something that can only happen with film, but it really has a similar look to me. By the way, this happens no matter what lens I put on the camera. So it's not the lens, it's the camera. And I have no idea. I'm still digging into this. So if you have any idea what could be happening, what would cause that in a digital camera, I'd be curious. This Kodak really is a special camera, but unfortunately, unlike some other older cameras, it really makes no sense to buy this camera today. In part because of the proprietary battery situation, which makes it really hard to power and actually use. And then because it's kind of rare for the price, you're way better off getting something like a Canon 5D Classic or early Nikon full frame camera or a crop sensor camera. And you're just gonna have a way better experience. You're gonna have third-party battery support, things like that. But I just had to share this with you all as one special camera. And just the question in my mind is, what if Kodak had continued? Kodak professional cameras were still here today. Where would we be? What would we have? It's just an interesting thought. If you haven't already checked out my other Kodak camera videos, I'll leave a link to that here that you can watch. I'll see you over there. And until next time, as always, happy snapping.